I think we have a few joiners. Welcome to you guys. We are starting the second session of this online seminar today. We just heard from Professor Torfing about sort of the core concept of robust crisis governance, and we had a bit of a Q&A about how does that fit with other concepts and what are really the scope conditions for this concept and what is it good for in a strategic sense. We now turn to the first of three sessions that deals with sort of the background conditions or the variables that sort of help us to prepare for reacting robustly. In the Robust project, we have been looking across Europe to understand where are the good examples of robust crisis governance and what are the conditions that seem to produce them. Professor Tiziana Carbonio of the University of Turin is leading a specific work package looking into the effects of multi-level governance and different patterns of interaction between the actors in multi-level governance, municipalities, regions, national governments, and the European level and international levels. This is a huge question to be in charge of. We all collaborate as well as we can to help her, but we are very happy to have Tiziana leading this effort, in which she has deep expertise. Tiziana, I will give the floor to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. I have just shared my screen with my slides. I hope you can all see them. It seems to work smoothly today. That's very good. Thank you very much again to all of you to be here today. Yes, what we want to present to you are the preliminary results of this work package, the specific work on the multi-level governance of crisis and how this links to robust governance. Today, we want first of all to introduce what is multi-level governance. Before, there was a bit of a discussion about, all these terms that are around to signify specific situations. Well, multi-level governance is one of those very successful words that is often used also in policy-oriented debate to indicate basically the fact that there is interaction in policy-making processes which brings together all relevant actors on the vertical or intergovernmental dimension of policy-making processes. And on the other hand, it's not just that all that government at different levels meet together. This is very much the realm of intergovernmental relations. There is something more in multi-level governance that is going on. That is also the engagement of non-state actors that are somehow involved or affected by a specific issue at different levels. And so they also are engaged in the policy-making processes together with authorities at different levels. And what is specific even more of multi-level governance is that these relations, these interactions, are not hierarchical, but rather are collaborative and somehow challenge the traditional top-down mode of policymaking, but try to establish a collaborative kind of interactivity. So starting from this definition of multi-level governance as interaction between different levels, different actors, public and private or non-public, and then as a type of collaborative and non-hierarchical interaction. Oh, sorry, it's not just, I just went on the wrong slide. Okay, here I go. So starting from this definition, We see in the literature that there is a lot of debate on the fact that multi-level governance is simply desirable and good problem-solving technique, because it secures the participation of a lot of actors that are then crucial for the implementation of the policy. And this will certainly result in more legitimate solutions that are then accepted and also concretely implemented in an effective way. And the policy actors involved in the decision making are also more than happy to comply with what has been decided. But other scholars have also emphasized the possible trade-offs of this kind of very open and participative, collaborative ways of decision-making. Some critical authors have emphasized the fact that there is a lack of visibility of what goes on in multi-level governance relations, that these kind of relations are often uncoupled from the traditional democratic structure, institutional structure. Often they are linked to the government but are not under the control of the parliament, for instance. So there is a bit of an uncoupling between multi-level governance, venues, meetings, and so forth, and the traditional democratic structure. And then also the composition of the networks. It is not that clear sometimes which actors are able to participate, on which basis, and so forth, is often kind of derives from a lot of informal relations rather than official and open decisions. So the questions then arises of how multi-level governance can contribute and interactivity can contribute to policymaking processes in a mode that is leading to robust responses to the crisis and the turbulence that this crisis bring to the public sector. So our question, the question that we address in this work package, is how basically multi-level governance interactivity took place during the COVID-19 and refugee crisis, and to what extent this interactivity within multi-level governance policymaking processes led to robust responses in terms, as we just heard from the intervention of Jakob Thorfinn some minutes ago, in terms of adaptation, innovation, but also what is very important for us is legitimacy. As we said, multi-level governance policymaking process are thought as better than traditional hierarchical process because they are more legitimate. They are legitimate from the actors that concretely intervene in implementing the decided policies. So today I'm happy also to present to you some illustrative cases of multi-level governance venues and processes that we have found in our research, in our international reports that have been compiled by our partners and that regard different countries, as you can see from the slides: Belgium, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. And, you know, I will present these practices by describing briefly the key characteristics of these venues in terms of who took the initiative, who promoted the meeting, the task force, the roundtable, how you want to call these venues, who participated in these venues, in this multi-level governance meeting, and how interactions within these meetings and within these venues took place. And then also I will try to a bit elaborate on the features of the key responses that were taken within these multi-level governance policymaking processes. Here you can see in this picture some preliminary results of our country analysis. So we see that many of the venues and commissions, committees that were established during the COVID-19 crisis, which are those in red color, were basically established top-down from the national government, and were primarily intergovernmental, in the sense that involved primarily other authorities at different levels of government in order to implement some policies that were necessary at the time. And basically, these venues were kind of clubs, where the national government, usually, or depending on the type of competencies, sometimes the regional governments, were inviting authorities at other levels of government and a few actors from the private or the public, or non-public sector, like NGOs, depending on the issues at stake that were to be addressed by these venues. On the other hand, we have also more inclusive experiences of coordination committees. For instance, these multidisciplinary crisis committee of the Aragon region in Spain, which was very broad in its composition, including also NGOs, representatives of the general practitioners involved in the vaccination process and so forth. So these venues were more like forums where there was an invitation, again, from the top, from the regional or national government, but this invitation was more extended and created a broader opportunity for actors in the civil society, in the private sector, to interact on specific solutions. And we find also, and in blue, you see in blue color in this figure, some examples of venues that were created in response to the refugee crisis. This is the case, for instance, one example of forum multi-level governance that we bring in this table is that of the National Coordinating Group on Asylum and the regional working tables that were established in Italy. We have also other types of initiatives, of multi-level governance initiatives, starting very much from the bottom up, so from local authorities or local non-public actors that have been engaging also with other actors on the same level, but also trying to engage actors at higher levels of government. And here you see a few examples, actually, all from the refugee crisis. So the project Plan Einstein in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and the citizen platform that took place in Brussels in Belgium. So here, basically, in the case of the Plan Einstein, this is an initiative from the municipality of Utrecht that tried to mobilize primarily, but not exclusively, the national government. And in the case of the citizen platform, it started like a platform engaging NGOs at the grassroots level in Brussels, but then ended up to somehow attract the attention and engage also public authority at the city and regional level. And so here we find a very broad assembly of actors that has been able to propose solutions with respect to this type of situation of crisis. Going more in depth on some experiences that maybe we can also discuss in our Q&A. In the COVID-19 crisis, the online task force for the production of personal protection equipment in the case of Italy was a clear case of club-like multi-level governance, since the Office for Socially Useful Work of the Department of Prison Administration of the Ministry of Justice somehow used some of the or resorted to some of the experimentations that were already in place in some Italian prisons to expand the scope of this experimentation to the production of extremely needed personal protection equipment at the time of the crisis. And you see here that the actors that were involved were primarily other public authorities, but also some private companies that provided the know-how and contribution to the concrete production of this equipment in the Italian prisons. And then I was also mentioning in the time of the refugee crisis, this example of forum multi-level governance, where the national government attempted for a while to bring together all the key actors at the in the national government, but also regional authorities, local representatives of the Italian Association of Municipalities, and also representatives of key civil society organizations that were engaged in the reception of refugees in the years between 2015 and 2014. So to go to the results, basically we see that forum types of multi-level governance have been present in both the COVID-19 and the refugee crisis. And this type of multi-level governance venues were very good in opening space for more options in terms of solutions, and also combining together adaptation, the interest, of course, of public authorities to adapt what is already there. But on the other hand, the opening of the floor to more options from stakeholders took also greater attention on innovative practices, and also strengthened the legitimacy of the practices that were put in place during these decided upon and put in place during the crisis. During the COVID-19 crisis, however, we see a prevailing mode of multi-level governance, which was very much guided from above, from the national governments. So kind of clubs with the national government inviting the actors that consider it more important in order to implement the vaccination strategy that had been decided upon by the government, or the production of personal equipment, as we have seen. And there was some room, of course, some room for innovation, but primarily for adaptation, especially considering maybe the objection of practitioners in the case of vaccination and so forth. During the refugee crisis, as I showed, there was more scope for bottom-up venues. And so the emphasis was very much on legitimacy of reception projects. And, you know, there was a lot of contestation also towards the national government for the lack of effective reception projects. So in this case, legitimacy from the grassroots was very useful in order to promote innovation. So to conclude, in this session, it would be very interesting for me to hear, based on your experiences, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, if multi-level governance policymaking was helpful in case you have been engaged in some kind of process venue that was aimed at establishing a multi-level governance interaction, or, from your perspective, in case you were not engaged, that would have been helpful in order to face the challenges of the crisis. If you think there are more challenges in multi-level governance interaction, or more opportunities that can be teased out for the solving of or the contribution to the robust response to crisis. So really, it would be great to hear from you now your experiences with multi-level governance and how this worked out in your experience. Thanks a lot for your.
Thank you, Tiziana. And I should add that, as far as I can count, we are around maybe 27, 28 people in the room. And that's big enough maybe to be a little bit scared of who is hiding out there, but small enough that we can actually talk. We have the chat here for questions, but we have selected the meeting format of the Zoom platform, which does not necessitate that you all stay quiet. You can actually jump in and present your reflections or your questions. So with that being said, I will just add my own question here, because this is something that I'm quite interested in. You cite this example from Italy, right, where we have the prison system becoming involved in producing protective equipment for the health system, which is sort of a dream scenario for collaborative governance in some sense, right? In what sense was this unique to the crisis, do you think? I mean, was it innovative, or was this really building on something already being underway in Italy?
Yeah, I just mentioned passing by. Thank you, Rasmus. I think it's very important also, in order to distinguish, the fact that governance can be multi-level governance can be done in different ways. So in the case of this experience, which is a very concrete one, that took place online throughout the first phase of the crisis in Italy, it built upon what was already done in many Italian prisons in terms of training for detainees in these prisons. And there were close connections between some private firms, especially working on manpower management and training, professional training, with the ministry, that somehow led the ministry also to consider this opportunity. So this is why, I found it more of an adaptation of a practice that was kind of a club, because the actors were already somehow there, and they had just, to be called over the phone and brought in a informal, very informal online round table. And then, building on these practices, they of course also brought about some innovation, because before they were not working on personal protection. But yeah, definitely in the kind of club, we have already a group, while the forum is more open, really, to everyone has a say on a matter. Yeah, and I would be very interested to hear if there were maybe more experiences of forum than what we found in our national reports. Our impression is that, you know, there was a lot of drive during the COVID-19 from the national government to really invite the key actors that could provide with sharp kind of input in order to implement vaccination, PPE production in the case of Italy, you know, this kind of very specific, or testing in an more effective way. But, you know, the margins from innovation seem to us, at least in this kind of venues, very narrow. While in the forum kind of situations, which certainly, you know, the COVID-19 probably was not the best context to develop, but still, you know, there were some examples, the one I was mentioning in the Aragon region. So maybe would be interesting to hear if you know more, and if you think that there is this distinction. Probably, you know, actually there was not also in the club kind of situations, there was a lot of innovation.
Yeah. So the floor is open. Reflections. How did multi-level governance work in your country during COVID-19? Does this distinction between a club of close-knit relations versus a more open forum, does that relate to any of the experiences? Are you saying, Tiziana, that the club is worse?
Yeah, well, I was also looking at the comments before on local authorities that I think are very important, and, you know, would be interesting to hear also if there are representatives there of local authorities. It's not that the club is worse. I mean, if these are the key actors, and, you know, maybe the national government starts with, okay, we want to implement these, we call the key actors, and they should help us and adapt to the concrete situation, the implementation of vaccination or testing. But then they may end up probably to suggest also in these smaller venues different solutions. So, you know, some of the interventions before I saw were mentioning that probably the local level is more a suitable context where solutions are elaborated and concretely implemented. So, you know, I think it would be very important to hear from them if during the crisis, you know, they would have been interested not just, you know, in adapting what was going on and the flow of decisions from above, but also, you know, in contributing, if they had the opportunity to contribute to shape some of these decisions. And yeah, basically, the perspective of local authorities, I think it's very important in all types of multi-level governance.
I don't really have well, an answer to, or another insight, but I have another question. When it comes like to this club versus forum, top down versus bottom up, and all the decisions that were made, did you also look, like either in the national reports or like anyone else has some experience with it, at how, like, the efficiency behind it, you know, especially in reaction times, what to do when, who's taking the decisions and everything? Because I could imagine that in bottom-up approaches that could be quite difficult, also like looking at power imbalances and those kind of stuff.
True, yeah, this is a very good question. And it brings back to the, you know, possible pitfalls of multi-level governance. It's so good to have everybody engaged somehow, but on the other hand, it cannot be practical. And I think, you know, it is not by chance that if we see some bottom-up experiences, we see that primarily in the refugee crisis, where, you know, social actors at the local level really had to face the emergency, and they knew each other already. They were already very active in a city. In the case of Brussels, this platform was somehow already there. And also in the case of Utrecht, there were already, some kind of relationships between the municipality and the NGOs and so forth. So, these are somehow easier, let's say so, situations where bottom-up multi-level governance can develop. Probably in the context of COVID-19, efficiency was really paramount issue. And so some, steering from above was necessary, especially in the first phases, in order not to have just, different organizations going in different directions in a situation that was already quite chaotic in itself. So yeah, probably there is also something on the type of crisis that can call for different modes of multi-level governance.
Thank you.
I think for a European audience, Tiziana, some of what we're probably thinking about is also how did the interaction between the European level of decision making and the national decision making, how did it work? Did it work well, or what do you think? I mean, they were very keeping with this topic of PPE, for instance, right? In the very early part of COVID-19, we had a very, very public row between the European Commission and a lot of the nation states about the failures to coordinate purchasing of protective equipment and so on. And so, of course, one of the things that I've learned from you is that we should be careful not to call everything multi-level governance, right? Because then the concept washes out. But in this interaction with the European level and the national level, what do you take away from studying the crisis? What worked and what did not?
Yeah, well, the European level so far, I mean, we have been working on that, and we are still carrying out some interviews. I think, that really at the time, there was a lot of coordination between the Commission and the national governments. I personally wouldn't call that properly multi-level governance. I saw a hand before, I don't know, probably maybe can be a point also connected to that. For instance, local authorities were not involved in all, the national EU negotiations, and also NGOs, maybe some, of course, private firms, but I don't know, yeah, if we can call that properly multi-level governance in the sense that we have considered in this project. And then if there were interventions from the local level, that would be very interesting to hear.
Yeah.
I saw a hand, but can't see that anymore.
Maybe we're fighting the post-lunch sleepiness. In any case,
yeah,
I think this is a very interesting topic that you're working on, right? Sticking with your theme of the club versus the forum, a lot of the talk that we had initially was warnings, basically, of a kind of crisis of authoritarianism, right? That now we would see governments drawing all the power to themselves, right, to steer countries, and to and maybe even things bordering on illegitimacy. So, but maybe that was not exactly what happened, right? And I think your conceptualization here says something about the multiplicity of the ways that that governments can intervene, not only through this very strict hierarchy, but also gathering um, gathering actors around them. And maybe there are differences there between the countries, right? It
Yeah.
sounds that Italy is your forum there is quite it sticks out a little bit in a European context, right? Because maybe we saw in Denmark, for instance, we talked about that. We saw a lot of very hierarchical decision making, really. So why is Italy more open to this forum, do you think?
Well, I think that some countries definitely have more of a tradition, probably of negotiations with local authorities, and especially in Italy, the regions have a lot of competence regarding health matters, health issues. Also Spain, so it's not by chance probably that we see this kind of important roundtable in the Aragon community and probably in other communities, because health is a highly regionalized matter. Thinking of the case of Italy, I would say that at the beginning, rather than collaboration, there was kind of conflict. The regions were also quite, unhappy to see this centralization of decisions, and especially the lockdown decisions were, very much stopping, interfering with all kind of economic activity at the regional level and so forth. And so the beginning was mostly conflict going on in the case of Italy. And then some kind of intermediation and negotiation again developed. So, it might be that also there are not just, clubs or forums, but depending also on the unfolding of the crisis and timing of the crisis and so forth, and the institutional structures of the countries, we will find a bit of, of clubs and forums, and maybe less, what we found less in the case of COVID was bottom-up mobilization. And, that would be good to hear also from our, maybe our representatives here, if they had some experience of, bottom-up initiatives that were able also to attract the interest of other levels of government.
I see David.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see me or if you can hear me.
Yes.
I hope that you can hear me and see me also. I wanted to join you. I will have to leave in a few minutes to drive one of my kids elsewhere, and I will come back. I think that both the times these bottom-up and top-down approaches could be seen quite frequently in Czechia. You also mentioned that this is determined by like past ways of collaboration. This could be also seen in Czechia when we were speaking with mayors of small municipalities. Their former experiences somehow determined the ways they cooperated during the beginning of the COVID crisis, as well as the beginning of the migration crisis. Usually they try to cooperate with people with whom they cooperated sufficiently and with good experiences in the past. So also we are getting to this distrust between levels of government and how this impacts cooperation during crisis. Also, you mentioned this importance of time. It was related to the first phase of the COVID crisis, and this was also linked to efficiency in the beginning of every crisis, which is unprecedented. Usually the decision-making is more top-down, and there is a clear aim to adopt quick decisions, and the decision-making is more open to other actors later on when we know more about, for instance, the COVID virus. So the time also matters. Definitely, we can find quite a lot of bottom-up approaches in Czechia. For instance, in the beginning, when nobody knows anything about the virus, NGOs were mobilizing people to sue these handmade masks and things like this. Also, people from authorities were joining these initiatives. And it also depends on the locality, because if you are far away from the capital, usually you can have more of these bottom-up approaches and more open ways of decision making. So I think like this time factor, this previous experiences with cooperation, also the location, may be quite important for like discussing practices of collaboration. So yeah, we can find quite a lot, but the problem in Czechia is that we have so many municipalities and information are so fragmented. So we tried to add some input to these reports, and definitely we could not like monitor everything because the practice is so, also because of the time dimension and so on. So yeah, that's some points from me to help you a bit.
Thank you. No, thank you, David. That is a good point. I mean, of course, in the reports, we could not cover every single practice at the local level. That's true. Yeah, it might well be that we could cover just part of that. I have to say that probably in the case of COVID, however, the input from above was very much felt as necessary, especially in the first months. And so many of these practices probably were very much fragmented and did not reach the kind of, critical capacity to be also able to involve regional governments, national governments, and so forth. So this is a bit my sense. While in the case of the refugee crisis, really, since there was also a lot of contestation towards the national government, the critical capacity was very much there at the local level, also to criticize the government. Probably this also happened during COVID, but, at the very beginning, probably nobody knew really what to do, or if it was, the case of contestating or not. It took, some time, while in the case of the refugee crisis, it was in many cases at the local level, very much a mobilization that started from below and was objecting, contesting, proposing an innovative perspective to that of national governments. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of fragmentation in local experiences, and it makes, things more complicated.
I now have to leave for about 30 minutes. I will come back.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much, David, for your question. I think if the audience is satisfied for now, I think we will thank Tatiana for your presentation here and for the discussion, which was very interesting. I hope we can pick up on these themes, of course, as go through the next sessions, because these are quite interlinked perspectives on what happens during a crisis and what is it that helps us to react robustly as in the public sector. So thank you, Tatiana.
Thanks for you.
We can, Rebecca, if you're there, we can take the 10-minute break now, I guess, and we will be back at 2 o'clock for a presentation by Stephen. Thank you very much, guys.